The sevens that we've looked at so far, just in quick review, because we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but was the 7 signs of divinity, the 7 days of creation, the 7 disciples, the 7 men that were listed, the 7 women that were listed, and then the 7 witnesses, the 7 feasts, and then the 7 discourses were 7 and 8. And last week we were going to talk about 2 more, but we got hung up on Cosmos and covered Cosmos, and hopefully that was a blessing to you. It has a lot of depth and a lot that we can go further into it. Maybe in the future may follow that a little bit farther. But tonight's number 9 is 7 I ams. There are 7 times when Jesus says, I am something. Now, this is not the great I am. This is not the Old Testament I am. But these are references to his I am, being something, okay? So let's go to John 6. John 6, if you have your papers, John 6. John 6:35. Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me will not hunger, and he who believes in me will never thirst. Look down at verse 48. It's 35 and 48. He again repeats, I am the bread of life. And so our first one, John 6, is the I am of the bread of life. Okay? Our second one is John 8. John 8, verse 12.
Could I ask a question?
Please, yes.
Okay, so when he's breaking bread, he says, this is my body broken for you. Do you think that's a direct reference to that? I mean, that's what...
I think it's a carry through, yeah. I think it's a continuation of the same teaching. Yeah. Yeah. Again, the Passover bread was bread of life, because it was the Passover of life and death. And so the bread of life is referring to the Passover bread. Also, it refers to on the feast of first fruits. When the first fruit was waved, and it was called, this is life from God. God has given us this life and this harvest. And so that was the wheat harvest, and that was the bread of life. Then remember on Pentecost. On Pentecost, the wheat that was now grown and was ready for harvest 50 days later, after the first fruits is when it sprigs out of the ground. 50 days later, it's ready to harvest, and so the priests would go out to the fields, the wheat fields of the temple, and would cut a sheaf and bring the sheaf back. And they would take the wheat and pound it, literally pound it on the altar as a threshing floor. So much I could teach about that, the threshing floor of Mount Moriah and the altar. But they take the wheat and they pound it so that what is left is wheat. And then the wheat is crushed and made into a loaf of bread, 2 loaves of bread on Pentecost. And on Pentecost, then, the 2 loaves of bread are held up to all of the people and says, this is the life-giving bread of God. This is the bread of life.
So they understood that when he was doing,
they knew exactly, the referencing to the feast, that he's really equating himself to the feast. And what's the significance of 2 loaves of bread at Pentecost? Do you remember what are the significance? One is the Jew and one is the Gentile. All right? That at Passover and first fruit, it was said that one becomes many. They take the piece of bread and they split it. 1 loaf of bread becomes many. But then at Pentecost, the many of the wheat on the altar becomes 1, becomes the loaf. And then they made the 2 loaves, and they said, well, how can there be 1 loaf and 2 loaves? And said it's of the same mix, and it's just the division of that same mix. And so this was the mystery of Pentecost. How could 2 loaves of bread be 1 loaf of bread? Well, because it's from the same lump. And when you take that on then to the Old Testament, to the New Testament, and the Jews and the Gentiles being grafted in, then suddenly you have this beautiful picture of the grace and the law becoming out of the same lump of bread, the same dough. Again, so many layers of all of this. And so when he said bread of life, all of that went through their heads. All of that went through. It was like an explosion of this bread, that bread, this bread. I mean, how important was bread in all of the feasts? Almost all of the feasts we use bread in some way, shape, or form. And so each one of them is a thanksgiving to the life that God has given us. And if we had time, we'll do a bread of life teaching, but because it always goes back to the garden.
Amen. And that was right there too.
Same thing, Lord'sburg, it was served.
Yes, our daily bread, and so it's so tied up into one reference of Jesus referring back to all of the feasts and becoming the festivals. So I am, and when he says I'm the bread of life, he's referring to the fact that I'm the reason for the feast. I am the feast. So, anyway, quite a reference. So John 8:12. John 8:12. What does it say, somebody?
I am the light of the world.
That's right. I am the light of the world. He who follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. We looked at that when we looked at the antithetical dualism, didn't we, with the light and the darkness. And so the light, I am the light of the world. Our third 7 is John 10. A couple of chapters forward. John 10, verse 7. That's right, I am the sheep gate, I am the door for the sheep. Look at verse 9. I am the door. If anyone enters through me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. Again, you know, there's so many ways to heaven. There's so many roads to heaven. You can take any road you want to and get to heaven. It's just open door policy. As long as you're sincere about it. That's what Jesus said, isn't it? Now look at what this says. I am the door. If anyone enters through me, he will be saved. Okay. That's it, you know. There is only one way. It is the Jesus way. He is the only gate that the sheep can go through. This goes on and talks about hired hands and thieves and owners and all that stuff, and says, you know, the hired hand may not care whether or not the sheep get in the sheepfold or not because they haven't got anything invested in them. But the one who owns them will stand there and count them as they go in and make sure that all of the fold gets in, and that's God taking care of you and counting you as you enter, and Jesus is the gate by which we walk through into the sheepfold.
Hello.
I mean, God takes care of it. And the thought that there are so many ways to heaven is rubbish. Absolute rubbish. So many times in the gospel, Jesus' own words determine that. We can't say, oh, well, that's Pauline theory. Oh, well, that's the gospel theory. That's the disciples' theory. These are in red. They're the words of Jesus. So again, we go back, either he means it or he was a big fat liar. Okay? So one or the other. And so he is the door for the sheep. That's our third here. Our fourth is John 10:11.
Look out.
11. He is the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Now again, what does good shepherd mean? You remember what good shepherd means? We learned this a couple years ago. If ever I write a book, this will be the book I write, okay? Again, shepherds were filthy, dirty, unclean, corrupted people. It is hard to be around sheep and not get dirty. The fur and the wool of the sheep is filthy. When they urinate, when they defecate, it gets on them. And when you're with them, it gets on you. All right? And they are an unclean by nature, not spiritually, not in the temple. But by nature, they make us unclean. Those who are around them are made unclean by the sheep. And so shepherds were very low in quality. Remember, in Egypt, Joseph set up a banquet table for his brothers. But it had to be in a separate room from the king because the Egyptians would not eat with shepherds. Shepherds were dirty. So they had, and Joseph says, yeah, let's set up a separate room for them because you know all of those people from out there at Canaan, they're all just shepherds. I mean, Joseph is just playing into it. He's just setting the table, going, you know those folks up there, they're just dirty shepherds. They can't be trusted. They're filthy, dirty people, and the Egyptians wouldn't eat with shepherds. Now this all plays into God's hand because then Joseph says, well, let's limit them and let's make sure that they don't mix with the good Egyptians. Let's give them that land over at Goshen. Well, Goshen was the one place where there were springs and water. Because there was grass so that the sheep could eat. And he was securing the future of the Israeli people, of the Hebrews, to go to Goshen and to live in wealth and in prosperity. Rather than, well, let them live up somewhere up and down the Nile and wait for it to flood to live. Because the sheep won't live in the desert. He gave them this wonderful place. So the whole time he's talking about these dirty shepherds, he's setting Pharaoh up to give them a good place. Kind of cool? So anyway, when we talk about the Good Shepherd, though, the Good Shepherd was the reference that was given to the temple shepherds. These were the shepherds, these were priests whose job it was to tend the temple sheep. When we talked about Christmas and the Nativity, and we talked about where was Jesus born, we referred to this in depth, okay? That there was a place that is mentioned in both the Old Testament and the New Testament that is called the Tower of Watching in Bethlehem. And the Tower of Watching was a stone tower that the temple shepherds stood in, and they yelled directions to the dirty shepherds down below and said, look out, that one's about to get over there. Look out, you do this. And they stood and they overwatched the shepherds. Why were they called good? Because they never got dirty. They never got defiled. They stood in the tower and they took care of the temple sheep. The only thing that a good shepherd ever did that made them dirty was birth the baby lambs. And the tower was a birthing hospital for baby lambs. So a pregnant sheep would be brought in, and there would be a place for them to lay, there would be cloth, there would be clean water, everything would be set so that this sheep, when it gives birth, would come out as pure to be used in the temple. There was no room for him in the inn. And when Mary was pregnant, she was in Bethlehem, the place of the tower of the birthing of the lambs of the temple. And where would you want to take your bride? Okay, Norma, you're pregnant with one of your boys. If you stay in my home and have a baby, my house is unclean and impure for 60 days, according to the Levitical law. My house is impure because of the birth fluids of birth and the afterbirth of a child. But taking my pregnant woman to the birthing tower was a place of priestly presence. And birthing no longer, get this, had the curse of the birth on it. How could Jesus be sinless and still be born with the birth of the curse of a birth? He had to be born in the birthing place. Okay, let's go back. Okay, you remember that? So anyway, the good shepherd is a temple shepherd who watches over. In other words, remember, the hired shepherd doesn't care. It's the good shepherd that watches over the hired shepherd, and so Jesus says, don't worry, I'm watching it all. I'm in the tower over it all. I'm viewing it. This last trip, when we got to go to Bethlehem, my heart's desire was to go where archaeologists believe that tower was at, because it's right in the middle of a neighborhood on a street now. I mean, it's just a neighborhood. But we pretty much know where it was at from some diggings in the 1700s. But our trip to Bethlehem was just a chaotic nightmare. It was John 11:25. Yes, please, yes. Back up.
Yeah, back up.
Yeah, John 10.
John 10:10.
Yep.
There's another I am there. And it's one of John's mystical writings. Is that getting back to the door?
Now in 10:10 you said?
Yes.
Okay, 10:10 says, the thief comes only to steal and to kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. What does yours say?
I am come.
Okay, yeah, no, the I am come would be not an I am, but it would be more of a verb, but,
A verb, okay.
yeah, I am come.
I kept reading that, it says.
That should fit in,
It
yeah,
should
no.
fit in, but it also could easily fit into the door.
Yeah, it's just, I came. That's how it should be referenced, yeah. The Middle English would, or the Old English would say, I am come to this place, but it's really, I came to the place. Okay? Yeah, good question, thank you. Okay, John 11:25. We're just kind of giving the hits, aren't we, tonight? I mean, it really is. This is Jesus at his best. This is just the cream of the crop. This is Jesus' best hits.
Hold on to your seats.
Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even if he dies. So resurrection and life, they have to go together. Resurrection without life and being dead, you've got to be resurrected to have the life. So those two are intimately tied together, aren't they? The resurrection and the life. And again, at Jesus, why didn't he just say what he meant? Why didn't he just say what he meant? Why did he beat around the bush so, this is so open to interpretation, and how you believe, isn't it? He just kind of nails you in the forehead with it and says there, okay? All right, John 14:6. John 14:6. I am the way and the truth and the life. And guys, I know you've heard this in sermons before, but if you don't have this written in your margins or whatever, or if you've got notes in your electronic Bible, it literally says, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. I am all of those things, which would make 3 times, but it's really written once. But it refers to a repetitive. Okay? That I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life. It is not I am the way and a truth and a life. No, I am each one. No one comes to the Father but through me. Again, there's that, well, every road leads to heaven. Kind of gets detoured, doesn't it, at this point? The way, the truth, and the life. What did Carol say? Carol said somebody was trying to prove something to her the other day, and she looked at him and said, this is not an argument you're ever going to win with me, so let's just go on and talk about something else. Isn't that just true? Sometimes you just have to say that. We're not going to do that. So, anyway, John 15. Let's go over one more chapter here. John 15, verse 1. I am the true vine. Now, what did we say truth means? Come on, let's go back a couple of weeks. What did truth mean? We talked about truth, we talked about believe, we talked about know. What does truth mean? Well, I'm not going to tell you, you have to look it up, okay? But it has to do with the true vine. You look back at what truth means and apply it to the true vine and see how much deeper that really is when you're talking about truth and vine in the same phrase. I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. All right, well, we can spend about 2 months on these 3 verses. You got it? The revealed, the undisclosed. It's the I am the vine that has been revealed to you. I am the vine that you've waited for. I am the vine that the Old Testament referred to. It's me. I'm here. Yeah, I'm the revealed vine is what it means. I'm the true vine. I'm the vine that all of the Old Testament spoke of.
Yeah.
Ta-da. Here. So how many of these I ams, think about how many of these I ams have referred to the festivals and the prophets and the Old Testament. And Jesus is just declaring, all that stuff you've been studying for hundreds of years and thousands of years? I am. I am each one of them. Yeah. So he came not to change the word, but to fulfill it. To fulfill it. And so these wonderful I ams are the fulfillment of the Old Testament. All right? Wonderful, wonderful phrase. John 15:1. I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. He's the true vine dresser. Of course, see, the vine dresser didn't have to be revealed. They knew who the vine dresser was. God's in control of the harvest. God's in control of vine dressers were the ones who clip and snip and prune, but the vine dresser is the one that has to choose which vines get chopped and burned?
Yes.
Where's the life of the grape? Where's the best harvest going to be? And this one's got more life in it than this one, even though it may be smaller, but next year it'll be gangbusters. We need to keep this one. And so a vine dresser is an expert at fruit, they're an expert at the growth. They have to know exactly what's going to happen a year from now. And so he's that vine dresser, and he knows. Yeah, Bob.
King James.
Yes.
And my father is the husbandman.
Yes, yes. Yeah, that's, we get animal husbandry from that, you know, the whole concept of the one who makes the life and makes the connection. And that whole idea that I'm going to clip these, and the burning of the vines was always a very traumatic time for a farmer, because they always hoped that they made the right choices when they made the clips. Did I clip the right ones? Did I keep the right ones? Because some of those vines are up here on the trellis, and some of them are clipping at the ground. And if I clip that, I could be losing 100 pounds of grapes and gallons of wine, just because of that one clip. Maybe I'm making a dead spot on my vineyard. So when we talk about eternal damnation, it is the vine dressing. It is the taking of the dead, and the chaff and the wheat and the burning of the fields and all of that. I mean, it's all now what we understand about agriculture today, isn't it? But it's exact referencing, yeah, Revelation. That's good, thank you. Okay, so John 15:1, we have the true vine. In verse 5, again, I am the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me and I in him, he bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can get along, but you won't really do very well. You know what it says? God helps him who helps himself. For apart from me, you can't do. Yeah, my electronic Bible's a little glitchy here evidently, huh?
Mine says that those who pull up themselves up by their bootstraps.
Bootstraps, yeah, those are the ones, yeah, that's the vine there, okay? So anyway, we've got the 7 I ams here, the 7 I ams that we've covered. I don't want to get, let's get part way through, we still got about 15 minutes, because I have a very long teaching for next week, okay? And it'd be good to get part of next week done, so we... Now the others I'll refer to, I am something that will fulfillment. I am a vine, I am a this. But there are 7 times in the book of John when Jesus refers to himself as the great I am. The great I am. And so isn't that amazing? Isn't it? I mean, what a coincidence this book was written that way, isn't it? Just all these coincidences that it just so happens it's used 7 times. Anytime, that's right. Anybody writing this book through centuries and adding to it could have this same mathematical formula set up. So let's look at the 10th and final list. The 10th and final list, and that is the I am. And what I'd like to do next week, we'll cover some of these tonight, we'll finish next week. I would like to teach you a little bit about the I am. That'd be all right?
Sure.
We study the I am of the Old Testament. What does it really mean? And so we'll finish up our 7s with the last half of this I am. Let's get a couple of them tonight, okay? Let's hit a couple of them. The first one is found in John 4. John 4. Now everybody understand the difference of what we're talking about. The first 7 I ams were referring to an actual event or incident or title. But now we are talking about equating ourselves with God. We are going back to the old I am of Moses, and Jesus was referring to that. So I think this is a really important and cool list to keep track of, okay? So John 4:26. Jesus said to her, I who speak to you am he. I am is how it's actually recorded, okay? I who speak to you, I am. I am. The great I am. This is, of course, the woman at the well who has all kinds of husbands in history. And he says, I am, to the Samaritan woman. Okay, the second one is John 6:20. In our language it says, it is I, but it is really I am. Do not be afraid. I am. Our third one is John 8:24. John 8:24 says, therefore I said to you that you will die in your sins. Now see again, that namby-pamby Jesus, he just loves everybody, doesn't he? He just standing there saying, I forgive and love everybody no matter what you do. You just live your life anyway. What would Jesus do? Well, he'd tell you you're going to die in your sins. For unless you believe that I am he, you will die in your sins. If you don't believe that I am the God of the Old Testament, you will die in your sins. If you do not believe that I am the God who parted the Red Sea, who spoke on Mount Sinai, who created the world, you'll die in your sins. We must believe that he is and is a rewarder of those who faithfully seek him, the scripture says.
Yes.
We have to know that he is. Is what? Is the I am. We must come to that point where Jesus is God. And this is where people struggle. Everyone wants to make Jesus a prophet or a teacher or a really cool kid in the class.
Yeah.
He's one of the cool kids. But no, he's the I am. He is the I am. And so this was spoken to a group of Jews, okay? In 8:24. Sorry, did we get there? 8:24? No. Yeah, 8:24. Therefore I said to you, yeah. Okay. That's spoken to the Jews. John 8:28. Jesus said, when you lift up the Son of Man, then you will know that I am he. Okay? And if you, now look at that. What's different about that I am he that we've been looking at? I should have pointed this out earlier. He is in italics.
Yes.
What does italics mean?
That wasn't in the original.
It's not in the original. Yeah, it's put in the English to make more sense, but it should just say I am. For a true believing Christian, we know what that means. You see, evangelical believing Christians know what I am means, but not everybody does. So I am he, okay, means God. And I do nothing on my own initiative, but I speak these things as the Father taught me. So again, this is a reference to Jews, just saying the great I am. All right? John 8:58. Jesus said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was born, I am. This is the one that Don just brought up. Yeah.
You didn't say I was.
I am. He is before Abraham, I am. The God who called Abraham out, I am. All of those references to Abraham would refer directly to Jesus himself. John 13. John 13:19. From now on, I am telling you before it comes to pass, so that when it does occur, you may believe that I am, italics he, right? So I am with the non-existent e. And our last and final one is John 18. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that one is to the disciples. Sure is. Thank you. John 18:5, 6, and 8. They answered him, Jesus the Nazarene, and he said to him, I am. Jesus also, who was betraying him, was standing with him. So in the garden, and remember, these are temple guards. These are not Roman guards. These are the guards of the Sanhedrin who are arresting him. And so the temple guards who are priests, who's just like sergeant of arms or something like that. They are a part of the priestly order who are the guards to protect the temple. They are trained in warfare. They are trained in crowd control. They are trained in archery. They're trained in slings. They're trained in lances. They're trained in keeping the crowd down. Are the ones who have come, and they're fully militarized to arrest Jesus. And so these are priests that he's speaking to, and he says, I am. I am.
But when he spoke those words, what happened to these tough guys?
Yeah.
They all fell back.
They fell.
Fell down.
Well, we say fell in the spirit. You know, they it says he drew back and fell to the ground when it happened. And so look at verse 6. So he said, I am, and he drew back and fell to the ground. In verse 8, I told you that I am, so that if you seek me, let these go their way. I am. You've come to arrest God. You've come to arrest God.
Yeah.
And so they fell, and that was it. All right, so that covers the great I ams, okay? Yes,
That's
please.
reference to him. They fell, or was it just?
No,
Kind of Shekinah?
I think they've been blown back, yeah.
Okay.
Again, I think that there are about a dozen places in Scripture where people fell under the presence of God.
Sure.
We say that the kabod is glory, and the other word for kabod is weight. That the presence of God is heaviness.
Yeah, okay.
And I think that when television evangelists do this, and everybody falls down, that a lot of that is psychological. But I have prayed for people who have collapsed under the presence of God, who have fallen and had to be held back up, especially healing and deliverances and things like that, where they just crumble under the presence of God. I'm not pushing them, I'm not coaxing them, I'm not psychologicalizing them, it just was happening. So I think there's enough references in Scripture of it happening. I'm not sure it happens on every television show every week. All right, next week, one thing I wanted to say, one more thing I wanted to say. I have told you that I do not believe in Kabbalah, right? Kabbalah is the modern mystical Judaism. It has taken the place of what John would have been as a seer or a prophet. But folks, Kabbalah was created in the Middle Ages, the medieval ages, with alchemy, pharmacopoeia, the occult. It is not to be ventured into by any Christians or Jew today, okay? Now, when you go to Israel, there will be rabbis, long-haired rabbis with long beards, with the curlies and the hayat, and they'll come up to you and they'll try and tie a red ribbon around your wrist. They want to tie a ribbon around your wrist. And they say, it's a blessing, it's a rabbinic blessing. And it is, it's a rabbinic blessing. But that's a part of Kabbalah. The Kabbalah is that this is the red string that was tied around the horns of the scapegoat. Remember how the scapegoat had the red tied on? And so this is the promise of the Messiah, that the Messiah will come. And I tell people, it means nothing to us. Let them go ahead. If you want to give them $1, the whole idea is that they're panhandling. They're panhandling because rabbis in Israel do not work. They don't work, they study. They just study. And so they're a huge drain on the economy. The more of the conservative Jews that go to Israel, the worse the economy of Israel will be. It's just the way it is. Because they don't work and they don't serve in the military, they don't do any of that. They just come and study. I don't mean this in a negative way, but kind of freeload on the economy, okay? But they'll try and tie one of these on you for $1, and especially when you go to the Wailing Wall, they're everywhere, they'll try and do that to you. And I tell people, if you want to give them $1, it's fine. Just, you're a Christian, you can't be blessed or cursed or whatever by elements. We're that's been taken care of. But that's the whole concept, is this Kabbalah. But Kabbalah has 10 points. And ancient Judaism believed that 7 tens was the height of perfection. 7 tens, guys, is the number of the garden.
Oh, really?
7 tens is the number of the Garden of Eden. And so they believed that 10 and 7 was the perfection of God as He did. That anything beyond 10 sevens gets into corruption and the world begins to fall. But 7 tens is a perfection. I find it really interesting then that was the teaching of the day of John, and he has 10 sevens in his teaching.
Oh, hello.
And so I see that, and if you take the number 7 and 70, and how many times do we forgive? 7 times the number of the garden. 7 times the garden. But anyway, I wanted to show this chart that there are 10 points of Kabbalah, which I believe have their roots in the mysticism of John. But it's been counterfeited. It's been made a cult, okay? But the 10 points, if we kind of blow this up, the crown is at the top, which is deity. This is God in His height. And then God gives us understanding, wisdom, judgment, but judgment must be tempered with kindness,
Yes.
okay? But that kindness is there, those are the top 5, and then the bottom 5 is that there is beauty in everything that God does, and we see His splendor, we see eternity, we have the foundation, and we enter into His kingdom. And so the top 5 lead to the bottom 5, the bottom 5 lead to the top 5, and you see that they connect them all together. Each one of those lines is a letter in the alphabet, which has a meaning. And we've looked at that. We've looked at how words have like window or door and things like that, and how each letter in the alphabet has a Hebrew connotation. Well, all of these tie together in an incredibly mystical and spiritual way. That wisdom is this, and this leads to that, and that connects with this. And so I find it interesting that going back to the time of John, that 10 would have been the perfect number for 7s, and that Kabbalah has carried that through. And in our study, we've carried it through and found a perfect 10 listing of 7s. Okay?
Is that my imagination?
Yes.
Is that a cross on top?
Yes, many people have seen a cross in that. Many people see a cross. And look at what the cross is behind it. The beauty of the understanding of wisdom of the crown. The connection of those 4 is really, I mean, the beauty of the cross is not beautiful unless you understand. And you have wisdom in it, and you understand that that was God's crowning glory. That Jesus on the cross was the crown. So yeah, those 4 become quite important. And yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Many have written about that, how much Judaism has the answer, but doesn't see the answer.
Say that again.
Yeah. You've got splendor, eternity, foundation, and beauty. All see beauty ties together the top half and the bottom half, doesn't it? That's beautiful. So that can be taught forever, and then Kabbalah people will teach that forever. They'll get out of the scriptures and teach just this model. And the colors of the stones of the breastplate.
Do you have the?
High priest of the breastplate. Yeah, they're the stones. So there's significance in all of that. So what are we going to look at next week? We're going to look at the I am, and we're going to ask, what's in a name? What's in a name? We'll look at that next week, okay? Yes, please.
The Jewish women, did they understand all this? I mean, the
Yeah.
men were schooled in it, were the women, did they, like when something happened, did they know the significance?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. With Mary and Mary Magdalene and all of them. In fact, at the time of Jesus, men and women worshiped side by side. They were not separated. In today's congregations, of course, women and men cannot meet together. But at the time of Jesus, they were not separated at all. Usually it's because if you ever watch like the movie Yentl, the idea is that only a man has the brain to understand the things of God, and that and you girls are still carrying around the curse of Eve. You're still carrying around the weaker curse of being Eve. And so it was during the Middle Ages that there was a separation between the men and the women into worship. And that was very, very Judaistic. Okay? But that's one of the things that the Muslims copied from Judaism. And so when the Jews did it, the Muslims did it. And so it's kind of a Semitic change that happened. But the women sat in the synagogue just as the men did, heard the same teachings and the same